Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation from APQC on 2025 supply chain priorities and challenges. Thank you for joining me. I'm Marisa Brown, the Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management at APQC. Every year, we gather insights on organizations' priorities and challenges for supply chain for the year ahead. Today, I'm going to share those results for 2025. And I'm really glad to see we have a global group joining our webinar today. Welcome, everyone. As far as our agenda goes, we'll start with a quick look at the research underpinning the data I'm about to share with you. And then we're going to take a look back at how supply chains ended 2024 in terms of meeting their goals. We're going to then shift into our forward gear and examine some of the changes and challenges for the year ahead. Then I'm going to focus on the top 3 priority areas based on the survey results. And we're going to wrap up with a look to the future. We want to see where organizations placing their bets for what's next. And the keywords all throughout are going to be adapt and anticipate. I do want to let you know there are several polls throughout the webinar, so those are your opportunities to participate as a member of the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature and feel free to engage with us in chat throughout the webinar. So just a quick note on the research. This is our 11th annual survey looking at priorities and challenges for supply chain. The data that I'm sharing was collected in November and December of 2024, so just a few weeks ago. We had almost 380 participants across more than 22 industries in 3 consolidated regions: the Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia Pacific. We have now published the cross-industry report along with industry and sector-specific reports, and we've also created and published a white paper. So I've included a link at the end of the presentation to all that relevant content for you who would like to get additional insights and see the full set of data. And every year we do surveys on these priorities and challenges, and each set of data includes different respondents. But APQC always cultivates a diverse global audience across industries so that we can find out what's happening in organizations around the world. We incorporate a mix of contemporary, of the moment issues and also evergreen topics for the discipline. So now let's take a look back at how did supply chains perform last year. Before I reveal what our research showed, this is your opportunity to weigh in. So we're going to launch our first poll. What we'd like to know is overall, was your organization's supply chain function on target for achieving or exceeding your business goals for 2024? So yes, you hit your targets. No, missed them. Not really sure, and that's okay too. Or it was so bad I really don't even want to tell you. So take just a moment and weigh in and let us know how your supply chain ended the year last year. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's just the answer, reality. Sometimes reality is better or worse than we expect. All right, so we'll take just another second. Everyone vote. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll and see how our participants did. Wow, 62% of you report that you hit your targets. 21% missed, and about 17% don't know. And that's okay. So we're going to go ahead and take a look now at how that compares to our research participants. So keep in mind, 62% of you said you hit your targets. Let's see what we learned from our research organizations. Wow, like almost not even like half, not quite half. 35% said they were on target in achieving or exceeding their business goals last year. So those of you on today's webinar should really consider giving yourselves a pat on the back, because what we saw in general was that there was a lot of disruption, as we all know, and that caused a lot of organizations to miss the goals they were aiming for. In fact, we saw that almost the flip of the percent of you who achieved your goals missed their goals last year. And we also take a look at how are organizations doing versus their peers or competitors. And we saw 27% said that they achieved or exceeded their peers. Now, I recently read a quote that said that preparing for the unexpected will no longer be optional. And I really like that because I think that describes the environment that our supply chains are operating in. But one of the things that's a little disturbing is if we look at this trend over time. So let's put this in context here. So we've been tracking since 2019, before the global pandemic, how are supply chains doing against their business goals? And what we see is that supply chains are impacted by a lot of forces outside their control: geopolitical conflicts, natural disasters, severe weather events, and things like labor strikes and other situations that are causing this kind of chaotic experience. And we see that, unfortunately, there's a downward trend since we kind of bounced back in 2021. There's a downward trend. And so it's not all joy and rainbows, but the good news is we're seeing that in response to some of this, organizations are making changes. So we're going to take a look now. We're going to leave the rearview mirror behind and take a look at how organizations are planning for the coming year. So we're going to start with looking at the trends that people are anticipating having the most impact on their supply chains. So just like everything, change is kind of the story to tell here. And we're seeing a change from prior years. We're seeing certain trends rise and certain ones fall in terms of the impact anticipated. So on the rise, we see process standardization, global trade and geopolitical risks, talent and labor issues. And moving down the list, making room for those, are supply chain digitization, big data and advanced analytics, and ESG, or sustainability, environmental, social governance situations. Now, we're going to dig into this a little more. So, as you can see, process standardization, more than half of the respondents in our research say that this is going to have a major impact on their supply chains. And this is the first time it's topped the list since 2019. So this is certainly a change we're seeing. And part of what I think is driving it is I've talked to a lot of organizations that said that they very quickly automated, but now they're having to remap processes after rolling out the technology because they went a little too quickly and they didn't ensure that their underlying processes were improved, documented, and even standardized across the organization. So they kind of threw the automation on top of chaos, and what they got is a suboptimal result. So now they're going back and they're doing things a little more strategically. When we look at geopolitical risks and global trade, there's so much happening globally. It's only February the 26th, and I can't even count how many times we've seen things in the headlines that are totally affecting supply chains. Whether it's changes in political leaders and regimes, threats or the reality of tariffs, trade reviews, desires to shorten the supply chain, reshore, friendshore, ally shore. It's one verb I've heard is swirling, and there is that. Well, we also see the impact of digitization. Technology is obviously here to stay. It's not going anywhere, but we're seeing that this encompasses the better use of both existing technology and also emerging technology. Because I'm sure that many of you might feel that you just can't even turn around today without bumping into AI, right? It's all over the headlines, the news, the business press, the general media. We're going to talk a little bit more about where AI is being used in supply chain in a minute. Also, big data and advanced analytics. That had been at the top of the list for the previous 3 years, and it's still very important and still anticipated to have a big impact. And I think that with emerging technologies, we're getting some support for making sense of the ever increasing amounts of data that are facing supply chain and helping us keep pace with all the data from our internal sources. And as we get more things like sensors and so forth, there's more data coming internally and external sources, whether it's sentiment analysis, things like that. And so there's no way as people we can really keep our fingers on the pulse of all of that at once. And that's where technology is really helping us with. And then talent and labor issues. We actually added that this year as a new element on this survey. And we're seeing that it immediately came in the top five. And I think that we're seeing a lot of whether it's return to work mandates, union issues, strikes, concerns about automation replacing people. That's a very real worry in certain areas, like some of the ports. Um, and I think we're also seeing the need for new skills for working with these different types of technology. So, my prediction is that we're going to see the people issues continue to stay at the top of this list and rise in importance in coming years. Because as technology and new technology becomes more widespread, your unique differentiator is going to be your people. As kind of the technology becomes table stakes, how you use that technology and the difference that it can make is up to your people. And then, not to overlook environmental, social, and governance factors. And there's a lot changing right now, especially regarding environmental regulations, DEI, things like that. And so all of those do impact supply chains. And then we have additional trends coming that, or that are here that people think are going to be important. And data management is really at the foundation of a lot of things that drive supply chain success. We're really talking about ongoing governance for your master data to ensure that you've got this solid foundation that helps you make better decisions. Because foundation decisions made on bad data are bad decisions. And we're seeing here that generative AI or AI, and there's new types of AI that, are being talked about. There's a moderate impact for the most part, partly because there's a lot of unknowns still, a lot more questions than there are answers. And we can't take our eye off cybersecurity. And I think it's interesting, and maybe it's a function of cognitive like overload, but we see a fewer lower percentage of organizations saying that they think it's going to have a major impact on supply chains. And this is concerning to me because the reality is the more that we are networking our supply chains and things are available online, the more opportunity there are for the bad actors to take action. And they do not go on holiday or take a break. So we need to keep our guard up in terms of cybersecurity and supply chain. Now, one comment I want to make is that these top anticipated trends really vary by industry. And so that's part of why we'll delve down into industry reports in our research. And so the next two slides, I often refer to them as an eye chart because there's a whole lot of color on the slide. But basically, we colored each trend the same color. So sustainability or ESG is green all across the board here. And process standardization is light blue. So what you can see, for example, is that in healthcare, sustainability or ESG is at the top of where they're expecting the biggest impact. But for electronics, for example, it's global trade or geopolitical risks. And if we take a look at another set of industries, we can see here retail and wholesale, talent and labor issues are at the top of the list in terms of where their potential impacts can come from. And in mining, you'll see sustainability is near the top, right after global trade and geopolitical risks. So there's a lot of nuance that happens at the industry level where these trends are really making an impact. Now, we've talked a little bit about what's going to impact supply chains and kind of where people see the biggest changes coming. But the question is, what's keeping organizations from improving their supply chains? So we're going to launch our next poll. There's an opportunity for you to weigh in. When you think about your own organization, and in light of everything you know is coming or think is coming, what do you think is holding you back from improving your processes? Is it lack of budget and resources to do the process improvement? Is it concerns about people, labor, and talent? Or lack of collaboration across your functions and externally? Or poor governance and data management? Or how about the implementation of new technologies? And we're talking about AI, the Internet of Things, drones, things like that. Or do you find that regulations and requirements are making change difficult? Or is it just too much change? So weigh in. We'll take just a moment to collect more votes. All right. And let's go ahead and end the poll and see how our audience reports. Wow, look at that. Number one is lack of collaboration across functions and externally, 32% of you, and 27% said lack of budget or resources for process improvement. So let's see how that compares to our research participants. All right. Look at that. Very much in line. They have the same number one concern, lack of collaboration across functions and externally. And may sound strange, but I'm glad to see that because that's actually an actionable obstacle. If you had said too much change, there's not a lot we can do to control the universe, right? But collaboration and improving that is something within our organizations that we can fix. Um, I see that number two is the implementation of new technologies. And I think it's not just the selection, but the rollout and how that impacts the way we work. We see that the lack of budget and resources and talent and labor concerns round out the top four obstacles. And I want to talk just a little bit about the lack of collaboration. And this has always been near the top of the list for supply chain. And I think a lot of the ongoing disruptions and challenging logistics issues have pushed it to the fore. But because supply chain has so many players involved, the lack of collaboration here can be toxic. Because if we have disconnects, that can lead to ripple effects that impact your customers and their ability to get their orders. And if they get their order, did it arrive on time? Was it complete, damage free? Did it have the right documentation? All of that leads to the perfect order from the customer's perspective, and collaboration internally and externally can impact that. And I think that we're looking at, okay, how do we improve collaboration across functions, supply chain planning, sourcing and procurement, logistics, manufacturing, your order management folks, your warehousing, and all your external parties, right? Your suppliers are part of this. Your 3PLs, your 4PLs, your carriers, the customs brokers, there's so many more. So how do we get all those players aligned and collaborating in the same way? And I provide some links to research at the end of this presentation, and we talk about some of the ways to take action on that. And this is a topic we will be examining later this year as well at APQC. So, and then we see the new technology piece. And I think what that is tied into is the need for better change management. And technology impacts our processes, our roles, the governance we need, and it's not really just a plug and play, right? We can't just get the new technology, plug in the black box, so to speak, and boom, everything is great. We have to work through these things and change the way we work and make sure that all of our people are up to speed on how things now have to be done. Who's on first, who's on second. And also, our technology is only as good as the data and the governance that sits at the foundation. And again, as I mentioned before, talent and labor, even with the latest technology, we still need skilled, capable people running our supply chains to thrive. So a number of you mentioned the budget, the resources. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the organizations in our research. We see, bottom line, referencing the bottom line, organizations are continuing to invest financially in their supply chains. More than half of the respondents in our research, 51%, expect their budgets to stay the same for supply chain tools, technology, innovation, and initiatives. But 44% are expecting an increase, and only 5% are expecting a decrease. And we've seen over time large percentages expecting an increase. Last year it was 50%, before that 66%. And so now while we see a big chunk saying it's going to stay the same, it's staying the same in many organizations at a higher level, at an increased level of funding. because the reality is that whether budgets are going up or down or staying the same, supply chain is in the spotlight, is understood by a lot of the senior leaders now as a critical enabler of the following. Now, that doesn't mean that each company isn't making those investments in different ways. And we need to think about not just technology, which is a common target for investing, but also the current state of the market and the impact of things like those trends we saw earlier and the geopolitical things that are happening and the external forces acting on our supply chains. Now, I had said earlier I'd just talk a little bit more about AI. And AI was a new addition to our survey last year. What we're looking at is the extent to which organizations are planning or using AI for various supply chain activities. We're trying to get behind the hype in the headlines because if you read some of the headlines, you would think everybody is already using AI and we are the last ones to the table. And that's not really the case. Although I will say that across the board, percentages for adoption did increase from last year. But the activities on the screen are listed in descending order for extensive plus moderate use. We see that demand forecasting has stayed in the first spot as the area with the largest percentage of organizations using AI already today. And I don't think that would surprise anyone. But also we're seeing that generative AI, the type of AI that lets you create new content like text or images, audio, data, it's also growing in popularity, with 84% using or planning to use it. And I think it's kind of interesting that 40% say that they don't have any current adoption plan for AI in their warehouse automation. So we see that in general, there's a lot of benefit to be gained from AI. Right now, I think there are still a lot more questions than answers. And if you look at this, there's not more than 1 out of 5 organizations using it extensively yet in these different parts of the supply chain. So now let's shift a little and talk about where are organizations focusing the most for this year. And this is really going to look at it going down a level from overall supply chain to the different parts and pieces of supply chain. So here's your chance to tell us about your organization's priorities for the year. So we're going to launch another poll. You can pick up to 3 areas that your senior leadership and your organization has said 2025 will focus on. Where is the spotlight in your company for this year? Is it order management, logistics and inventory management, product development, which is actually really an important part of your supply chain as they spec out the materials that will need to be sourced by procurement, right? Among other things. Is it supply chain planning, innovation, sourcing and procurement, or manufacturing? Where is your organization really emphasizing 2025? So take a moment and give us your thoughts. We'll leave the poll up for just a second. All right, you can pick up to 3 areas. It's multiple choice. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll and then share the results with you all. And let's take a look at that. So number 1 spot, 71% supply chain planning. Number 2, 60% sourcing and procurement. And number 3, logistics and inventory management by 54%. Well, I will say, spoiler alert, the top 3 remain the same with our research participants, but we saw an interesting change there. So we're going to stop sharing these results and show you what we found in our research. So this was the first year in a very long time, over 6 years, 7 years, that supply chain planning was not the top focus area for the organizations in our research. It is for you all on the webinar, and it has been for many, many years. But what we see is just by a small percentage, right? It's very close, these top 3. Sourcing and procurement and logistics and inventory management edged ahead of supply chain planning. That doesn't mean supply chain planning no longer matters. It's still very important. And we still see also a lot of attention for the remaining 4 areas. Innovation, 82%, order management, 80%, and then it drops down to product development and manufacturing in the 60s. So I'm going to concentrate on just the top 3 areas in this presentation, but we should not lose sight and keep all of them in mind, especially because industry once again plays a role here. And as with those top trends, we found that industry perspectives have a bigger impact on your focus areas than they have in the past. And so I'm going to show you, similar to the trends, what we saw for the different industries. And now I do want to make a comment. On the trends, we found no 2 industries the same. Here we found 2 that have them in the same order, but the percentages were different. But so here, let's take a look at the first set of industries. We've got 6 industries on screen. And just a reminder, in case anyone's madly trying to squint and see this, we will be sending you a link to the slides and the recording after the webinar, so you'll have an opportunity to take a look at this more closely. But you see that for aerospace, for example, logistics is the #1 most important area, whereas for healthcare, it's innovation. Or electronics, it's supply chain planning. So we do see sourcing and procurement in the top spot for 3 of these industries. But if you take a look, it really can vary. For healthcare, like I said, innovation's #1, but for aerospace, it's in 7. So it's not that a one size fits all kind of model exists. And the difference in where the organizations are placing their focus also then drives their strategies for the year, obviously. We'll take a look at another set of industries. So here we see the second half of the alphabet, if you will. And we see again a lot of variation. Innovation in the top spot for petrochemicals, whereas for retail and wholesale, it's logistics. And for mining, it's planning. So it's just a reminder that sometimes we have to dig down below the global headlines, if you will, to take a look at how things are playing out inside industries. And we do have industry reports available. So let's start with sourcing and procurement. Where within that did people say their priorities are? And then what are their top actionable strategies they're looking to employ this year? So supplier relationship management, or SRM, is once again the top priority area in sourcing and procurement, just like it was last year. And in fact, even more organizations said it's their top priority this year than before. And I think what we've learned as, supply chain professionals is that the success of our supply chain is so closely tied to the success or failure of our suppliers that we have to build these stronger relationships. And that's why we see on the right, 52% of organizations saying they want to improve those key supplier relationships. And historically, SRM was more about practices and processes to make sure the buyers could confirm that their third-party suppliers were complying with contractual terms and service levels and performance objectives. But we're seeing that picture become more nuanced recently. And there's really now more of a focus on building and sustaining collaborative, mutually beneficial relationships between buyers and those most strategic suppliers. And the strong relationships and the collaboration that comes from them enables organizations to really innovate, leverage innovation coming from your suppliers as well, which lets you react more quickly when a disruption happens. And those benefits can help enable more effective risk mitigation, which is also a big priority for more than a third of the organizations in our research. So we're seeing that focusing on the suppliers, and then of course, #2 spot is that standardization of processes. And I think that automation and digitization, which we see as part of this as well, really relies on those standardized processes. And that speaks to a desire for lower cost and greater efficiency, but also the need for more visibility with advanced analytics and other technologies. Logistics and inventory management. So the theme carrying throughout this whole presentation is change, right? We must adapt and anticipate. Well, in logistics and inventory management, we have a new winner, if you will, in the top spot. Supply chain visibility has emerged as a top priority in logistics. Last year was only 47%. This year it's 61% of organizations are looking at that. And it's just so critical as we're dealing with, changes and disruptions and things, making sure organizations can track their goods in real time so that they can figure out when there's a bottleneck and what is plan B or plan C, just to continue and keep your production going, and that your outbound materials and goods and customer deliveries stay on track as well. So visibility is vital. And we see also two-thirds of organizations are looking at optimizing their inventory as a way to help get there. In other words, making sure that they're saving costs by balancing adequately the need to meet customer demand while not overstocking, and also at the same time preventing stockouts. So, inventory management has historically been the biggest thing that folks are looking at when it comes to logistics and warehousing. And we're seeing that standardizing processes again is here, as well as the implement methods to reduce transportation costs. And in trucking, for example, the data indicates a return to, quote, normal in terms of rates and things. And we're seeing some settling down in the maritime market as well. But it doesn't take just one thing to happen globally, and all those could change in a heartbeat. So that visibility is vital, and understanding your inventory and where it is and where it's coming from, and going back to procurement, making sure you have those good supplier relationships is critical. And then rounding out the top three is supply chain planning. And here in the top spot, and has been for years, is demand planning and forecasting. And more than 1.5 times more organizations are focusing there than last year. And this could be the result of the fact that organizations are seeing greater value in being able to more accurately predict and anticipate customer demand, which, being more accurate there, can lead to greater operational efficiency and lower costs arising from avoiding excess inventory and better customer satisfaction. And again, we see standardized processes coming into play. Organizations are looking at, how do we map our processes, find what's broken, find the overlaps, the redundancies, the endless loops, the unnecessary approvals and paperwork, or whatever the case may be, streamline those processes, and then say, this is how we do it, document that, communicate that, and make sure that around the organizations, folks know what's expected and how the work should be performed. And then on top of that comes those new technologies and capabilities. But we're seeing that this process standardization is such a vital foundational step, because it really helps give you greater visibility into operations, because then you can compare data from different locations or business units, and you can minimize errors. You can minimize manual manipulation of data that has to happen to be able to compare and to evaluate performance, for example. Helps you reduce costs. And also, if your customers and your suppliers know what to expect because the process is the same every time, that can help foster greater collaboration. If the process is out of control, your customers never know, is my order coming today or in 2 weeks? Will it arrive, all parts intact, or is it going to arrive half and half in different orders? When your customers know what to expect and when your suppliers know what to expect, that really goes a long way toward improving the collaboration, which we saw as the number one obstacle to improving performance. And implementing the technologies and capabilities and keeping an eye on your skill sets and your people help your organization stay competitive. So now let's talk about moving forward. And we're going to come to our last poll. And I would just like to know, how are you feeling these days? Supply chain isn't always a touchy-feely place, but let's launch our poll to see how concerned you are about the future of global supply chains. Given all the changes and all the swirling and the chaos, supply chains are still amazingly bringing products and services to customers around the globe. So, are you not at all concerned about the future? Are you a little bit worried? Are you moderately concerned? Are you really worried about the future of supply chains? So, we'll take a second And this wasn't a research question. This is just a question I'd like to poll the audience here. So please weigh in with us. Let us know. All right, we'll take another second and let's go ahead and we're going to close the poll and see. All right. Well, 56% of you are moderately concerned. Now, that might have been the case 10 years ago, too. But we see a quarter of you almost, 24% are extremely concerned, 20% are slightly, and nobody is sitting back saying, it's all good, we got this. So I think that, there is genuine cause for concern, but as supply chains address their foundational data management, process management, and put in place technology and focus on investing in their talent, there are ways to survive the storm, if you will. So let's stop sharing these poll results and let's take a look at, so what can we do as supply chain professionals to prepare for the continued changes? Because the question is, not if. The question is just when the next hit comes, right? We're in the ring, the fight is underway. So as we prepare for continued change, and work on anticipating and adapting, I think the good news is that we're seeing organizations are changing. This year began a lot like last year ended, and frankly, as last year began too, but disruptions and challenges from all quarters. And again, whether it's geopolitical or labor or weather, I mean, my goodness, how many hurricanes had to hit, before we could say enough, we're done here. Um, and it's a little bit kind of like the shampoo bottle, lather, rinse, repeat, right? We think we're recovering from one and then bam, another disaster or crisis hits. So organizations need to really do their best to leverage all the available tools to sense and anticipate disruptions and also change how they respond. Because you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and hope for different results. Because that, my friends, right, we all know is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing but hoping for different results. So, as organizations, as professionals, we need to change what we're doing. And the good news is we saw that in the data for this year. Organizations are changing some of where they're investing and where they're focusing and what kind of actions they're taking. But whether you're focused on these priorities or something else, it's important not to neglect those foundational things like change management. That's a discipline that's been around for decades. But every time there's a new change, we have to remember that everyone in the organization needs to be brought into understanding the impact of that on the organization. We need to continue to focus on data quality and management and that collaboration with our internal and external members of our ecosystem. So just a couple of recommendations to hopefully make 2025 more successful than last year is strengthen your core areas like sourcing and procurement and logistics and inventory management. It's easy to get distracted with shiny new topics and, fun headlines about things like AI. And there probably are people in your organizations charged with figuring out how your organization can adapt and embrace those. But keeping our eye on the ball, if you will, as the great writer said, stick to your knitting. And at the same time, deepen relationships with your most strategic suppliers. That is a proven path to organizational success that helps with the collaboration challenges. It's definitely one of the things that will make a difference. Optimize and standardize foundational processes that will help better support digitization, automation, and the need for deeper visibility, and reduce the rework that happens when you don't do that first and just jump into automation. And I've said this before, automating a bad process gives you a faster bad process. So it's vital to look at the process, make sure the process itself is good and standardized and documented, and then is when the automation can really reap the benefits. And increase your visibility across the supply chain. There is no denying supply chains are in the spotlight, for better or for worse. Sometimes there's a little too much attention paid, but this is an opportunity this year for supply chain leaders to really show themselves and get recognized as a profession for being informed decision makers data-driven problem solvers, and trusted collaborators. So to learn more, we've provided you some links to research from APQC. You can download the new white paper we've published. It's publicly available. We also have a collection that has all the industry reports. We also look at these trends by region, by size of organization, and also you can look at the cross-industry report. And I've included a link for additional information. You can look at our Now in the Resource Library. So I'm going to pause for a couple of questions. And thank you, Eric, for asking, what are the biggest revelations or surprises in the latest surveys and other developments? It's a great question. So in terms of surprise, in a good way, it is that things have changed in our survey data. We've been collecting this same kind of information for 11 years. And if we just saw companies saying we're doing the same thing year after year after year, I'd be worried. The fact that we're seeing movement and different things rising to the top and things rising and things falling, that's a good sign because it means that organizations are adapting and learning and can hopefully then better position themselves to anticipate what happens. One of the things that, in terms of a revelation, that may be glorifying it a bit much, but we see that speed matters. Um, Time to react makes a difference. So the faster your organization can sense and anticipate that there's a disruption coming or some kind of, whether it's an extreme weather event, and what does that incoming hurricane mean for your facilities? Or what does that, flooding situation mean? Or the wildfire? My God, the list of disruptions is getting longer and longer. I think the murder hornets may be coming back. Who knows? But the faster you can react to those and have like a contingency playbook, that's what we're seeing is the organizations that win in this crazy chaos are those that have kind of said, okay, here's our plan A, our plan B, our plan C, our plan D. So if this is the type of disruption or this is where the disruption is, here's how we can react. Here's what we can do. We actually traced that through to the bottom line. And so the faster you can react, the more money your organization is able to save, the faster you can get product to your client and so forth. So there's a lot of benefit to doing the upfront homework and wargaming some of it and scenario planning a lot of it because the risks are there. You can't change that. You can only change how you react or how you anticipate them. Other questions? Let's see. Thanks, Ralph. We have a question about what do you feel is developing in the direct to consumers with e-commerce and be better in supply chain planning and process change? So e-commerce is a great question to ask about. One of the things that I recently participated in some certification programs with MIT's Center for Transportation and Logistics. And one of the things that we talked about is the fact that e-commerce is changing supply chains, right? When customers used to go to the store, you had to deliver only to the store, right? And all that last mile delivery was on the consumer. They went and picked it up. Now, suddenly you're delivering all that to individual consumers' homes, and that adds a lot more on the supply chain in terms of the last mile delivery. So supply chain planning has to now account for that and figure out where do you place your distribution centers? How do you get your materials, your goods, your offering as close to the biggest demand as possible? And there's a lot of data involved in all that. And that's where we see advanced analytics really helping and predictive analytics so that you know that you don't just need 40 units, you need 40 purple units and you need them in this zip code kind of thing. So I think that there's a lot of benefit from getting your processes mapped so you understand, okay, what does it take to be successful in e-commerce? We can't just keep overnighting from a central warehouse to pretend that we figured this out, right? And in the early days, a lot of companies were doing that. I spoke to some big retailers and they're like, don't tell anyone, but we are air freighting stuff every day so that customers can have it in the time frame that Amazon trained them to expect it. So now, the ship has sailed that e-commerce isn't going anywhere. So figuring out what are the incentives to maybe allow you to delay delivery so that you can better route your orders but at the same time still meet customer demand. Um, so we could talk for a long time about things like trees, like the green leafy trees were found in one research experiment to be the only thing that allowed that it like made a difference to get customers to say, yeah, okay, I'll wait a day or two instead of no, I want it tomorrow, was showing them the number of trees that were saved by that move, by that decision. So it wasn't giving them coupons, it wasn't giving them discounts, it was telling them how many trees they could save that made a difference. So there's a lot of impact on our supply chains from this, from the rise of e-commerce. So another question we've received is, what are you sensing are some key Gen AI use cases emerging for supply chain? That's a great question. And that's one that today I'm not prepared to answer, um, because there's so much in flux and happening right now. I think there are a lot of really bright minds working on answers to that. And APQC will continue to research that over the course of this year and coming years. But today, as I mentioned in the data, we're seeing demand and supply, demand forecasting and planning as an area where AI is coming into play the most, not necessarily Gen AI. And then there's agentic AI and all kinds of other, there's types of AI. And I think as generally we start to sort out these and sort out the benefits and the use cases, we'll see where we can go. Because right now, a lot of what I'm reading is coming from the vendors. And that's not necessarily always where we want, not that they're bad, but they're going to tell you that they can do all these things. So we need to get a little bit further down the road before we can start to see what's really truly making a difference in supply chain. So more to come. Stay tuned. Any other questions? And do feel free. I will give you my contact information. If you think of something afterwards, you're welcome to reach out. Would love to stay in touch and encourage all of you to look at the research, ask us questions. We love to figure out, how we can help improve productivity and quality in your organizations. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this up, give you back a few minutes in your day. Just want to thank you again for joining the webinar and invite you to connect with APQC. If you don't already follow us on our social media pages, please do so that you can stay engaged and get the latest updates. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.